decided you're no longer welcome at the wedding. This is a family event." The text came from my mother at 11:37 on a Tuesday night. I was still in my work clothes, eating leftover pasta at my kitchen counter, when my phone lit up with those two sentences. I set my fork down. I read them again. Then I waited, the way you wait after a door slams, to see if anyone comes back to apologize. No one came back. 30 seconds later, my phone buzzed again. My younger sister Piper had reacted to the message with a heart. I put the phone face down on the counter and looked at the wall for a long time. I'm a CPA. I've spent 11 years building a career on precision, on the idea that numbers don't lie, that the ledger always balances. Sitting in that kitchen, I understood for the first time what it feels like when the numbers finally tell you the truth you've been refusing to see. My family hadn't excluded me from a wedding. They had just made a business decision. They decided I was no longer worth the performance of loving. I picked up my phone. My hands weren't shaking. The first thing I did was open the family's shared Netflix account, the one I'd been paying $22.99 a month for since my parents cut the cable bill 4 years ago because they didn't watch much TV anymore. Except they watched it constantly, just on my dime. I went to the account settings. I removed their profiles. I changed the email address to one they didn't know existed, a dummy account I'd created for online shopping newsletters. Then I changed the password. Next, I opened Venmo. For the past 3 years, I had been sending my mother $400 a month labeled groceries because my stepfather Reg had thrown out his back and couldn't work full shifts at the hardware store anymore. $400 every first of the month, automatic transfer. I opened the recurring payment. I tapped cancel. The app asked me if I was sure. I was. Then I pulled up the shared cell phone plan. All 5 lines, mine, my mother's, Reg, Piper's, and Piper's fiancé Wade's, because apparently when you agree to help out with just the family plan for a few months becomes 31 months, and the fiancé's line gets added without anyone mentioning it to you. The monthly bill was $287. I navigated to the account. I removed the autopay. I didn't cancel anything. I didn't send a warning. I just let the next billing cycle become someone else's problem to notice. I closed my laptop, picked up my fork, finished my pasta. In accounting, there's a principle called matching. Revenue is recognized in the same period as the expenses that generated it. For 11 years, I had been paying expenses my family would never recognize. The matching period was over. I went to bed at 12:30. I slept better than I had in months. I need to back up, because the wedding exclusion didn't come from nowhere, even if it felt that way. You don't get a text like that without a long runway of smaller cruelties leading up to it. My mother remarried when I was 16. Reg was not a bad man in the way that some stepfathers are bad. He didn't yell, he didn't drink. What he did was make it quietly, consistently clear that I was furniture from my mother's previous life. Something she'd brought into the house that he tolerated but had never chosen. My mother, for her part, made a different choice every single day of my teenage years. She chose his comfort over my presence. When I disagreed with him at dinner, she changed the subject. When I cried in my room after a bad week at school, she knocked once and told me to keep it down because Reg was watching the game. When I graduated high school and got into the accounting program at Ohio State, she told me that was wonderful, but had I considered a community college closer to home, it would save money. It would be easier on everyone. I went to Ohio State. I paid for most of it myself, through scholarships, work study, and a part-time job at a campus coffee shop where I learned to function on 4 hours of sleep and black coffee. My mother called every few weeks. The conversations were short. She mostly talked about Piper. Piper is 5 years younger than me. She has my mother's eyes and Reg's personality. Charming when she needs something. Invisible when she doesn't. By the time I graduated and moved to Columbus, Piper had become the axis around which the family rotated. Her school plays, her travel soccer, her prom, which I was not invited to attend but was asked to contribute $200 toward the dress. I sent the $200, I don't know why. Some habits are just that, habits. The financial support started gradually, the way most things do when they're designed to be invisible. First it was the grocery Venmo, framed as temporary. Then it was the cell plan, framed as a favor. Then it was the $6,800 I wired my mother when the roof on their house needed replacing and the insurance company only covered half. She paid me back $500 of it in 2 installments, and then stopped mentioning it. Then it was $3,200 for Piper's car when hers broke down and she needed to get to her new job, which was 40 minutes away and apparently could not be reached by any other means. That one was called a loan with a repayment plan. Piper made 2 payments of $100 and then the subject died. In total, over 11 years, I had given or lent my family somewhere in the range of $34,000. I had kept records because I am a CPA and keeping records is what I do. The spreadsheet lived in a folder on my desktop that I had named, with the particular dark humor of someone who has processed a lot of feelings alone, family investments. None of it was ever called gratitude. My mother told her friends I was very generous, which I think was her way of taking credit. Reg never said anything. Piper once at Christmas said I was so lucky to make good money, as if my salary were a lottery win and not the result of passing 4 sections of the CPA exam while working full-time. The wedding invitation, or rather, the non-invitation, had been building since Piper got engaged to Wade 8 months earlier. I'd met Wade twice. He was the kind of man who interrupts women mid-sentence and then repeats what they just said as if it's his own idea. My mother adored him. She had immediately begun treating the engagement as the central event of the decade, and Piper had leaned into it the way Piper leaned into everything, completely, selfishly, with no peripheral vision. I was not asked to be a bridesmaid. That was fine. I didn't expect it and honestly didn't want it. What I did expect was to be invited. What I got instead was 8 months of wedding planning updates and the family group chat, venue tours, cake tastings, dress photos, and then, at 11:47 on a Tuesday, the text. My mother called the next morning at 7:15. I was already at my desk with coffee. "I know you probably have questions," she said. I didn't call my Jethro when I got the text. "It's just that Wade's family is very large and the venue has a capacity limit and we had to make some hard choices." "Mom," I kept my voice even, "you had 180 days to tell me. You texted me at midnight." I didn't know how to bring it up. "You didn't know how to bring it up," I repeated. The silence on the line was the silence of someone who has been caught but is hoping you'll help them find an exit. "I need you to understand," she said, "that this is Piper's day." "I understand completely," I said. "Have a good morning." I hung up. Rag called an hour later. He didn't open with sympathy. He opened with, "Your mother is very upset that you hung up on her." I let the voicemail finish. He also mentioned, toward the end, that the cell phone bill had been declined that morning and he assumed it was a bank error on my end. I didn't call my Bex. I called my grandmother instead, my father's mother, Grandma Evelyn, who was 81 years old and lived in a 2-bedroom house in Dayton that smelled like cedar and old books. She had been the fixed point in my life since my father died when I was 9, the one person who had always, without qualification, been on my side. She had come to my college graduation when my mother sent a card saying she had a prior commitment. She had mailed me homemade cookies during every exam season until I was 26, at which point I told her she didn't have to anymore and she sent them anyway. She had called me every Sunday for as long as I could remember, and she always asked how work was going and actually listened to the answer. She answered on the second ring, the way she always did. I didn't tell her about the text right away. We talked for a while about her garden, about a book she was reading, about whether the new hardware store in her neighborhood was as good as the old one. Then she said very quietly, "Something's wrong, sweetheart." I told her. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I've been watching this for a long time, Cassie. I want you to know that." Cassie. My name is Cassandra, and everyone else in my life has always shortened it to Cass. Grandma Evelyn was the only one who called me Cassie. It sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. I need to tell you something, she said, and I need you to stay calm. She told me that she had updated her will 6 months ago, that her lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, had been trying to reach me but had an old email address, that she had been thinking about this for a long time, that she wanted to tell me herself. I'm leaving you the house, she said, and the savings, and the investments your grandfather set up before he passed. I've thought about it very carefully, Cassie, and you're the one who should have them. I didn't say anything for a moment. Grandma, don't argue with me. I'm 81. I've earned the right to be right about things. I laughed, even though my eyes were burning. She told me the total would be somewhere around $1.4 million, including the house value, the savings accounts, and a stock portfolio my grandfather had quietly built over 40 years of careful, unglamorous investing. She told me she had already spoken to Mr. Hargrove and that the will was airtight. She told me she was not telling anyone else. Does my mother know? I asked. Your mother, Grandma Evelyn said, is not my daughter. She is the woman who married and then divorced my son, and she has treated you like an afterthought for 20 years. She will find out when Mr. Hargrove reads the will. Not before. I drove to Dayton the next weekend. We sat in her kitchen and ate the lemon pound cake she made from a recipe she'd had since before my father was born, and we talked for 6 hours, and it was the best day I'd had in longer than I could remember. She passed away 11 weeks later, a stroke in her sleep. Mr. Hargrove called me on a Wednesday morning, and his voice was the voice of someone who had been doing this for a long time and still hadn't gotten used to it. I'm very sorry, he said. She was an extraordinary woman. The will reading is set for Friday at 10 a.m. Your family has been notified. I understood immediately what that meant. I had 3 days. I spent part of the first day doing something I'd been thinking about since the morning after the wedding text. I'd left the cell plan and the Venmo cancellation in a kind of administrative limbo. The payments had stopped, but I hadn't closed the accounts or made any final moves. I hadn't wanted to escalate unnecessarily while Grandma Evelyn was still alive. She had always believed in handling things with restraint. But she was gone now, and the will reading was in 3 days, and I knew exactly how my mother and Reg and Piper were going to walk into that room. So I spent Thursday doing something much more deliberate. I knew from years of managing my own finances and occasionally untangling my families that my mother and Reg had refinanced their house 2 years ago, taking out a home equity line of credit to cover what she had described to me vaguely as some expenses. I had helped her understand the paperwork because she found financial documents confusing. In doing so, I had seen exactly what those expenses were: Piper's college tuition balance, a credit card consolidation, and a personal loan that had been quietly accumulating interest since before the remarriage. They were not wealthy. They were performing wealth, which is a much more expensive hobby. I also knew from a conversation with Reg 6 months prior that he had borrowed money from a private lender to cover a property tax bill they'd fallen behind on, and that the repayment deadline was coming up. He had mentioned it the way people mention things they're hoping someone else will offer to solve. I had not offered. I went over every document I had access to, my own records, the family plan invoices, the Venmo history, and I built a clean, complete picture of exactly how much I had given and exactly how little had ever been returned. Then I printed it out, put it in a folder, and brought it with me to the will reading. I wore my oldest cardigan, pale blue, slightly oversized, a snag on the left sleeve I'd never bothered to fix. I left my hair down. I drove to Dayton in my regular car, not the newer one I'd bought last year. I walked into Mr. Mile Hargrove's office with my shoulders slightly forward and my eyes on the floor, and I sat in the chair farthest from the desk, the one half hidden by a tall bookshelf, and I held the folder in my lap and said nothing. My mother and Reg arrived in his truck. She was wearing a black dress that I recognized as the one she saved for occasions she considered significant. Reg was in his funeral blazer. Piper came separately with Wade, and she was on her phone when she walked in, and she glanced at me and said, "Oh, you made it," in the tone people use when they're surprised by something they find mildly inconvenient. I looked at the carpet and nodded. Mr. Hargrove opened the file. He was a small, precise man in his late 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the posture of someone who had spent 40 years being the most competent person in most rooms. He read through the preliminary information without drama, date of execution, confirmation of Grandma Evelyn's mental and legal capacity at the time of signing, notation that the will had been reviewed and updated most recently 14 months prior. My mother shifted in her chair. Reg checked his watch. He did it the way people do when they want you to notice they're doing it. Mr. Hargrove continued. He listed the assets. The house on Carver Street appraised at $310,000. The savings accounts totaling $187,000. The investment portfolio valued at approximately $933,000 at current market rates. He paused to let the number settle. Piper had stopped looking at her phone. My mother put her hand on Reg's arm. The entirety of the estate, Mr. Hargrove said, looking up over his glasses, is bequeathed to Evelyn's granddaughter, Cassandra. The silence was so complete I could hear the heating system click on. Then my mother laughed. It was a short, disbelieving sound, like she'd heard a joke that hadn't landed right. That's not right, she said. There must be a version issue. She updated this recently. She must have meant to include the whole family. The document is current and unambiguous, Mr. Hargrove said. Mrs. Evelyn was entirely lucid at the time of signing, as attested by her physician and her longtime pastor. There is no error. Cassie can't manage an estate this size. Piper's voice was different than usual, higher, thinner. She's never even owned property. She's a renter. She turned and looked at me with an expression I recognized from childhood, the particular contempt of someone who has always been the favorite and cannot process a world in which that changes. I kept my eyes slightly unfocused. I let my chin drop. I made my hands look uncertain in my lap. I didn't call I said softly, It's a lot to think about. I'm not sure I'm equipped for something like this. My mother pounced on that. Exactly what Cassie needs is support. We could set up a family trust, something managed collectively, so she's not overwhelmed. That would require Cassandra's agreement, Mr. Hargrove said. Of course she'd agree. My mother was warming to this. I could see it, the plan forming behind her eyes, the relief of it. She's always been sensible. We just want what's best for her. Reg leaned forward. We could help manage the property, make sure the investments are handled correctly. We have relationships with people in Dayton. We know the community. It makes sense for it to stay local. Wade, who had not said anything until now, said, There are significant tax advantages to a family trust structure. I've looked into this kind of thing. I stared at the carpet. I let the silence build just long enough for everyone in the room to feel like they'd won. Then I sat up straight. I don't mean I shifted my posture slightly. I mean I sat up the way you do when you decide something, spine long, shoulders back. The full height of someone who has spent 11 years building a life that no one in this room ever bothered to take seriously. I set the folder on Mr. Hargrove's desk. I'm fine, I said. I'm a CPA. I've managed complex financial portfolios for clients for 9 years. I think I can handle this. The room recalibrated. I watched it happen. The small adjustments in body language, the exchange glance between my mother and Reg, the way Piper's chin came up. Mr. Hargrove allowed himself the smallest possible smile. There is one additional provision, he said. Mrs. Evelyn was quite specific. Any party who formally contests the will or pursues legal action to challenge the distribution of the estate forfeits any supplemental bequests named in the secondary schedule. He opened a second page. That includes a $45,000 cash bequest to her daughter-in-law. He nodded toward my mother. And a $20,000 bequest to Piper, contingent on no contest. My mother went very still. She included you, I said quietly. She didn't have to. She included you anyway, and the only way you lose it is if you fight this. Reg's jaw was working. He looked at my mother. She looked at the table. The property tax repayment deadline he'd mentioned 6 months ago was, I happen to know, In 19 days, $45,000 was not nothing. I didn't want to fight, my mother said finally. Her voice was flat and careful. I just want to understand. There's nothing to understand, I said. Grandma Evelyn made a decision. It was her right. I opened the folder. I didn't make a speech. I just slid it across the desk and said, "This is a record of 11 years of financial transfers from my accounts to various family members. I'm not asking for any of it back. I just want it on record, for myself, that it existed." No one touched the folder. Mr. Hargrove collected it calmly and added it to the file. Piper was on her phone again by the time we got to the parking lot. Wade had his hand on the small of her back and was saying something to her in a low voice. I didn't try to hear it. My mother caught up with me at my car. "I want you to know," she said, "that this doesn't change how I feel about you." I looked at her for a long moment. She looked the same as she always had. Same careful lipstick, same practiced expression of someone who is trying to seem warm. I thought about the $400 a month. I thought about the roof. I thought about the wedding text at 11:47. I thought about Grandma Evelyn in her kitchen with the lemon pound cake, saying, "I've been watching this for a long time, Cassie." "I know," I said. "That's kind of the whole problem." I got in my car and drove back to Columbus. The months after the will reading had the particular quality of silence that follows something loud. My mother sent 2 texts in the first week. One asking if I'd spoken to Mr. Hargrove about the transfer timeline, one saying that Piper's florist had fallen through and did I know anyone in the Columbus area. I did not respond to either. After that, she stopped texting. The cell phone plan had already lapsed. The Venmo transfers were gone. There were no more shared accounts, no more small ongoing financial threads tying me to a family that had decided on a Tuesday night that I wasn't worth an invitation. I closed the estate in 4 months. Mr. Hargrove guided me through it with the efficiency of someone who had been expecting to do exactly this. The Dayton house sold in 3 weeks, slightly over asking, to a young couple who wanted to plant a garden in the backyard. I stood in the kitchen one last time before the closing and thought about pound cake and Sunday phone calls and the particular way Grandma Evelyn laughed when something genuinely surprised her. I didn't cry when I got the text. I didn't call my best friend in a panic. I didn't call my best friend an Ibermatic. I didn't include. The investment portfolio I left mostly intact with some rebalancing. The savings I split between a high-yield account and a down payment fund. Because I had decided I was done renting. I found a house in a neighborhood I'd always liked. A 1940s colonial with original hardwood floors, and a kitchen that needed updating, and a backyard with a big oak tree in the corner. I bought it in November, and on the first night I slept there, I sat on the kitchen floor with a glass of wine because I didn't have furniture yet, and I thought about how long it had taken me to own a room that was entirely mine. The wedding happened in April. I know because Piper posted about it on Instagram, which we were not mutually following, but which was public. The photos looked like every other wedding I'd ever seen. She looked happy, which I genuinely hoped was real. Wade looked the same as he'd always looked. I wasn't there. I was in Gatlinburg that weekend, on the first vacation I'd taken in 3 years, eating breakfast on a cabin porch while the fog rolled off the mountains and the coffee went cold because I forgot to drink it. I don't think I thought about the wedding once until I saw the photos 2 days later. There's a thing that happens when you stop carrying weight. You've been carrying for a long time. You expect to feel lighter. What you actually feel at first is off balance, like your body had reorganized itself around the strain, and without it, you don't know quite how to stand. It took me most of that year to find my footing, to stop flinching when my phone buzzed, to stop doing the mental math of what my family might need next, what emergency might be coming, what I should be setting aside just in case. I still do the math sometimes, old habits, but it's different now because the numbers are only mine. I found a photo in one of Grandma Evelyn's boxes when I was sorting through her things, a picture of me at maybe 5 or 6, sitting on her front steps in a yellow dress with grass-stained knees, squinting into the sun and grinning like I owned the world. I don't remember the day it was taken. I don't know who took it, but she had kept it in a box with other things she valued, and that told me everything. I have it on my bookshelf now in the new house, next to a small plant that I water every Tuesday. Some people wait their whole lives for the people who diminished them to finally see their worth. I understand that impulse. I spent 11 years in it, but worth isn't something someone else decides to recognize. It's something you stop waiting to be given and start building, one clear account and one honest conversation at a time. Until one day you're sitting in a kitchen that belongs entirely to you and the only voice in your head is your own. Change the locks. You'll be surprised how quiet the house gets. There's a photo on my bookshelf right now of a little girl in a yellow dress with grass-stained knees, squinting into the sun like she has no idea what's coming. I found it in a box of Grandma Evelyn's things. She had kept it for decades, tucked in with her other valuables, without ever telling me. That's the thing about cause and effect that nobody really talks about. It's quiet, it doesn't announce itself. The consequences of who we choose to be and who we choose not to be accumulate in the background for years, sometimes decades before they surface. My mother made 1,000 small choices over 20 years, so did Grandma Evelyn, so did I, and every single one of them showed up in that lawyer's office on a Friday morning in ways none of us could have predicted when we were making them. I think about integrity a lot now, not as an abstract concept but as something mechanical, something with weight. Every time I sent that $400 Venmo transfer while receiving nothing back, not even acknowledgement, I was making a choice about what kind of person I was going to be. Every time I kept the records clean in that spreadsheet, I named family investments, half out of habit, half out of some stubborn refusal to pretend the math wasn't real. I was practicing a kind of honesty that costs something. It would have been easier to let the numbers blur, to tell myself it didn't matter. Integrity is mostly just refusing to lie to yourself when lying would be more comfortable. And then there's the question of what you do with what you know. I had 11 years of evidence that my family would not change. I am a CPA. I am not a person who misreads data. What took me so long wasn't ignorance. It was the gap between understanding something in your head and letting yourself act on it. That gap is where a lot of people stay forever. Closing it requires a particular kind of clear-eyed thinking, the willingness to look at a situation without the distortion of what you wish were true. Grandma Evelyn had that clarity. She saw my mother for exactly what she was, saw me for exactly what I was, and made her decisions accordingly. She didn't flinch. That kind of clear thinking is its own form of love. But the piece I'm most grateful for, the piece I had to build myself from scratch without a model, is the one that kept me going when nothing was being given back. The years of overtime and scholarship applications and 6 a.m. alarm clocks. The decision to go to Ohio State anyway. The choice to keep building something real while performing smallness for people who needed me to be small. That doesn't come from a plan. It comes from somewhere deeper, some refusal to let the version of you that other people have decided on become the version you live. You have to be stubborn about your own life in a way that sometimes looks from the outside like nothing at all. I sat on the floor of my new house that first night with a glass of wine and no furniture, and what I felt was not triumph. It was just quiet, the particular quiet of a life that finally belongs to you. Grandma Evelyn knew that was possible for me before I did. She kept a photo of a 5-year-old with grass-stained knees as evidence. I think she was right.